Marcus Blake was a man who preferred to stay away from the limelight and did not seek validation from others. At 52, he had established his life and enterprise on pillars of discipline, creativity, and unwavering determination. His agricultural technology firm, EcoHarvest Technologies, stood as his greatest accomplishment, specializing in cutting-edge vertical agriculture and water-conserving irrigation systems. EcoHarvest was not merely a company. It was his enduring legacy, demonstrating his ability to merge innovative technology with sustainable practices to make a meaningful impact on the world. Situated on an expansive, secluded estate just beyond the city boundaries, his headquarters symbolized self-sufficiency and forward thinking. The estate itself was a feat of engineering. Rows of towering glass structures housed sophisticated hydroponic systems, where vibrant plant life flourished under meticulously adjusted LED lights. Solar panels adorned the rooftops, and a state-of-the-art water recycling facility guaranteed that every drop of water was maximized for reuse. It wasn't simply a farm, it was a bastion of innovation, designed to function autonomously from the city's frequently unreliable infrastructure. For Marcus, this place was his refuge, a sanctuary where the turmoil of the outside world could not reach him. However, this semblance of control was shattered on an ordinary Monday morning. Marcus arrived at the main gate in his dark green pickup truck, a steaming coffee in a reusable mug by his side. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. At first glance, everything appeared as usual. The sleek gate stood tall, the perimeter fencing was intact, and the distant hum of machinery indicated his team was already hard at work. But then, he noticed the vehicles. 3 large white trucks, emblazoned with an official-looking emblem, were parked just inside the property line. Bright orange barricades had been erected around the entrance, and a group of uniformed officials stood in clusters, some holding clipboards and others pacing with purpose. Marcus frowned, gripping the steering wheel tighter as unease settled in his chest. This wasn't a scheduled inspection he had been informed about. He pressed the button to lower his window and leaned out, attempting to get a better view. One of the figures, a sturdy man in his 40s with a military-style haircut, noticed him and gestured in a manner that felt more authoritative than friendly. Marcus cautiously moved the truck forward until it was directly in front of the gate, but before he could speak, the man approached with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, sir," the man said briskly, without introducing himself. "We are here to perform a compliance inspection on behalf of the local Environmental Oversight Authority. I need you to park your vehicle outside the perimeter and step out." Marcus blinked in confusion. "Compliance inspection? I wasn't notified of any inspection." The man remained unfazed. "Notice was issued through the proper channels last week. If you didn't receive it, I suggest you contact the office. For now, this area is restricted while we conduct our work." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't appreciate being spoken to this way, especially on his own property. "This is private land," he stated firmly. "I haven't authorized any inspection, and I certainly didn't grant access to your team." The man's expression remained unchanged, though a hint of impatience flickered in his eyes. "Mr. Blake, your property is subject to recent regulatory updates concerning agricultural sites. We are within our rights to conduct this inspection. If you don't comply, we will have to escalate this matter further." Marcus exited the truck, closing the door with a firm thud. He crossed his arms, his imposing stature casting a shadow over the smaller man. "Show me the paperwork," he demanded. The man hesitated for a split second before handing over the clipboard. Marcus scanned the document, his eyes narrowing as he read the jargon-filled text. The language was intentionally vague, referencing newly amended regulations regarding environmental safety and resource management. Nowhere did it explicitly authorize a comprehensive inspection of his property. "This doesn't grant you the authority to shut down my operations or restrict access," Marcus said, holding the clipboard back. "You're overstepping." The man offered a faint smile, though it lacked warmth. "With all due respect, sir, that's not your decision to make. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have work to do." He turned and walked away before Marcus could respond. Frustration welled up inside Marcus as he watched the group disperse across his property. One team was unloading equipment from the trucks, while another was already setting up what seemed to be measuring devices near his water recycling tanks. The sheer audacity of their actions left him momentarily stunned. He took out his phone and called his operations manager, Emily Carter, who was already on site. "Emily, what's happening?" he asked as soon as she answered. "I was about to call you," she replied, her voice tense. "These officials arrived about an hour ago. They claim we're under inspection for non-compliance with environmental standards. I've been trying to get answers, but they're not providing much information. Keep an eye on them." "I'll handle this," Marcus said firmly. He ended the call and walked toward the nearest group, his boots crunching against the gravel. His mind raced as he weighed his options. These people weren't just inspectors. They were too organized, too confident. This wasn't a routine check. It was an ambush. As he approached the group, a tall woman with a stern expression stepped forward to intercept him. "Mr. Blake, I'm Olivia Bennett, the lead supervisor for this inspection. I understand you have concerns, but I assure you everything we're doing is in accordance with the law." "Law?" Marcus shot back. "You think legal jargon gives you the right to trespass on my property? I want this shut down immediately." Olivia smiled thinly, though there was a hard edge in her eyes. "With all due respect, Mr. Blake, that's not how this works. You're welcome to consult your legal counsel, but until then, I suggest you let us do our job." Marcus clenched his fists, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on him. This wasn't just about compliance or regulations. Something far more calculated was at play, and he was determined to uncover it. Marcus spent the next several hours trying to gather his thoughts and make sense of the unfolding events. After the confrontation at the gate, he walked the perimeter of his property, carefully monitoring the so-called inspectors. They moved with precision, setting up equipment and taking notes as if they had rehearsed every step of their operation. His employees, confused and uneasy, kept their distance, unsure how to proceed with their usual tasks, while these outsiders swarmed the site. By the time Marcus reached his office, he had observed enough to realize this wasn't merely about environmental compliance. The scale of the operation, the trucks, the teams of people, the specialized equipment, was far too elaborate for a standard inspection. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately. Sitting at his desk, he dialed his lawyer, David Sullivan, a pragmatic attorney who had managed all of EcoHarvest's legal affairs since its inception. The phone rang only twice before David picked up. "Marcus?" David said, his voice sharp and attentive. "I just received your message. What's the situation?" "I've got a problem," Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair and staring out the window at the intruders on his land. "A team from the Environmental Oversight Agency has taken over my property. They're calling it a compliance inspection, but I wasn't notified, and their paperwork is questionable at best." "Did they provide any official documentation?" David asked. "They handed me a clipboard filled with legal jargon," Marcus responded. "Nothing with a clear signature or proper authorization. It feels like they're trying to intimidate me with bureaucratic nonsense." "Send me a copy of whatever they gave you," David instructed. "I'll investigate it right away. In the meantime, don't sign anything and don't let them confiscate any equipment or materials. If they attempt to remove anything from your property, contact me immediately." Marcus ended the call and scanned the documents with his phone, sending them over to David. He then sat back, contemplating his next move. He couldn't simply wait for his lawyer to untangle the legal web while these individuals remained on his property, disrupting operations and undermining his authority. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Emily entered the office, her expression serious. "Marcus, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet, and Marcus's stomach dropped as he viewed the live feed from one of the security cameras near the main greenhouse. Two inspectors were dismantling a section of the irrigation system, carefully unscrewing parts and placing them into labeled containers. "What are they doing?" Marcus muttered, his voice low and angry. "They claim they need to examine the equipment off-site," Emily explained. "I tried to stop them, but they said I'd be interfering with an official investigation if I did." Marcus stood abruptly, grabbing his phone and storming out of the office. He marched straight to the greenhouse, his presence immediately drawing the attention of the inspectors. One of them, a slender man with wire-rimmed glasses, straightened up as Marcus approached. "Mr. Blake," the man said in a measured tone as though addressing a stubborn child, "this equipment needs to be tested in a controlled environment to ensure compliance with environmental regulations." "You're not taking anything off this property," Marcus snapped. "Put it back where you found it, or I'll personally escort you to the gate." The man remained unflinched. "Sir, obstructing an environmental investigation is a serious offense. I strongly advise you to cooperate." Marcus stepped closer, towering over the man. "This is my property, and that equipment is my intellectual property. You don't have the authority to handle anything without a proper court order." Before the man could respond, Olivia Bennett appeared, her calm demeanor as infuriating as ever. "Mr. Blake, let's not escalate this unnecessarily," she said. "We're simply doing our job, and we have every legal right to conduct this inspection. If you'd like, we can review the regulations together." "Spare me the lecture," Marcus retorted. "You're not taking anything, and if you don't leave my equipment alone, I'll have my security team escort you off the premises." Olivia's smile remained steady, but her eyes held a hard edge. "Very well," she said. "We'll note your lack of cooperation in our report, but I advise you to reconsider. Resistance rarely pays off in situations like this." Marcus clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew she was trying to provoke him into making a mistake that could be used against him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, signaling Emily to follow. Back in the office, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from David. He opened the email and quickly reviewed its contents. "Marcus, I've examined the documents you sent. The language is deliberately vague, but they're referencing a new set of local ordinances passed last month. It appears these ordinances were specifically designed to target properties like yours, large-scale agricultural operations with advanced water systems. I'm investigating the individuals behind this, but it will take time. In the meantime, don't allow them to remove anything off-site and document all their actions." Marcus's frustration deepened as he read the message. This wasn't a random inspection. It was a coordinated attack. Someone had orchestrated this using legal loopholes and ambiguous regulations to gain control of his property. "Olivia," he said, looking up from his phone, "I want you to document every move they make. Get photos, videos, anything you can." Emily nodded. "Understood." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, taking a deep breath, his mind racing. "First, we secure our critical systems, move the backups for the irrigation software to the off-site server, and lock down the control room. Second, I want every employee briefed on what's happening. No one speaks to these officials without my approval." Emily hesitated. "Do you think they'll target the data?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I'm not taking any chances." As the day progressed, the tension increased. The inspectors continued their work, setting up equipment and taking samples without providing any explanations. Marcus's employees grew more uneasy, their usual routines disrupted by the constant presence of strangers. By late afternoon, Marcus received another call from David. "I have some preliminary findings," David said. "The ordinances they're citing were pushed through by a coalition of local officials and a private environmental consulting firm called TerraPlan Consultants." "TerraPlan Consultants," Emily echoed, frowning. "I've heard that name before." "You should have," David replied. "They're a front for the Stonegate Ventures, one of the largest investment firms in the state. Stonegate has been aggressively acquiring agricultural land over the past 2 years, targeting properties with strategic value. Water access, renewable energy systems, you name it." Marcus felt a surge of anger but forced himself to stay focused. "So this isn't about compliance, it's about forcing me out." "Exactly," David confirmed. "They're using the ordinances as a pretext to make your operations untenable. If they can't shut you down outright, they'll inundate you with fines and red tape until you have no choice but to sell." Marcus took a deep breath. "What are my options?" "For now, we fight this legally," David advised. "But you need to be prepared for a long battle. These people are playing the long game and have significant resources." Marcus hung up, his mind racing. He had worked too hard to let his company be taken from him. Whatever it took, he was going to fight back, and he wasn't going to play by their rules. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the property, Marcus Blake knew he was running out of time. The inspectors showed no signs of ending their operations. Instead, their activities became more invasive. Teams were now scattered across key areas of his facility, photographing equipment, recording data, and dismantling minor components under the guise of environmental assessment. Marcus paced his office, strategizing. David Sullivan's earlier revelation that a powerful investment group was likely behind this operation had confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just an inspection. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle his business piece by piece. Whoever was orchestrating this wanted him out of the way entirely. His thoughts were interrupted by Emily, his operations manager, who burst into the room, her face etched with frustration. "Marcus, we've got a bigger problem," she said, slamming a tablet onto his desk. "They've started accessing the main water recycling system. They claim they need to take samples directly from the filtration tanks. I tried to stop them, but they threatened immediate fines if I refused." Marcus glanced at the live feed on the tablet, which showed two inspectors in hazmat suits near the water tanks. One was preparing to drill into the filtration system while the other scribbled notes onto a clipboard. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered, grabbing his jacket and heading toward the door. "I'm putting an end to this now." Emily followed closely as they made their way across the property. The atmosphere was tense, with employees huddled in small groups, whispering to each other as they watched the outsiders at work. The usual hum of productivity had been replaced by a heavy silence that felt oppressive. When Marcus reached the filtration tanks, he found Olivia Bennett waiting for him. She stood with her arms crossed, her sharp suit immaculate despite the industrial grime surrounding them. "Mr. Blake," she said smoothly, her tone oozing feigned politeness. "I trust you're here to cooperate this time." "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, pointing at the man drilling into the tank. "You have no right to tamper with my systems. Shut it down now." Olivia raised an eyebrow, seemingly amused by his outburst. "We're within our rights to collect water samples under the current compliance regulations," she stated. "Your filtration system is a critical part of this inspection. If it's found to be non-compliant, we'll have to take further action." Marcus stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "If you damage that system, you'll be personally responsible for replacing it, and I'll ensure the courts hear about every single violation you've committed today." For a moment, Olivia's mask slipped. Her smile faltered, and a flicker of annoyance crossed her face. Quickly, she recovered, gesturing to the technician to halt the drilling. "Very well," she said, her voice icy. "We'll document your refusal to cooperate and include it in our report. But I assure you, Mr. Blake, this won't end well for you." Marcus ignored her, turning to Emily. "Get security to lock down this area. No one touches these tanks without my explicit permission." As they walked back toward the main building, Emily spoke in a low voice. "Marcus, this isn't just about compliance anymore. They're testing you, seeing how far they can push." "I know," Marcus replied, "and I'm not going to let them win." Later that evening, as the inspectors packed up their equipment for the day, Marcus gathered his core team in the conference room. The mood was grim, but determination filled the air. "We're under attack," Marcus began, his voice firm. "This isn't just an inspection. It's a coordinated effort to cripple our operations and force us out. I've spoken with David, and we have a legal case, but that won't be enough. These people have money, connections, and time on their side. We need to be smarter, faster, and tougher than they are." "What's the plan?" one of his senior engineers asked. "First, we secure our systems," Marcus replied. "I want all critical data backed up and moved to the off-site server. Lock down access to the control room and disable any external connections they could exploit. Second, we document everything. I want photos, videos, timestamps, anything that shows what they've done here. Emily, that's your job." Emily nodded. "Already on it. I have security footage and logs from today. I'll ensure everything is backed up." "Good," Marcus said. "Now we need to identify who we're dealing with. David mentioned an investment group with a vested interest in taking us down. I want every connection they have to local officials, every name tied to those ordinances, and every company they've targeted before. If we can expose them, we'll have a fighting chance. As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just defending his business, he was fighting for everything he had built and believed in. However, the next morning brought an even greater escalation. When Marcus arrived at the property, he discovered that the barricades from the previous day had been replaced with heavy-duty fencing. Signs warning of restricted access were posted every few feet, and a new team of inspectors was already at work. One of them approached Marcus as he exited his truck, handing him an envelope with a red seal. "This is a cease and desist order," the man said curtly. "Effective immediately. All operations on this property are suspended pending further investigation." Marcus tore open the envelope, scanning the document inside. The order cited vague claims of environmental violations and safety concerns, clearly another tactic to force him into submission. "This is nonsense," he said, crumpling the paper in his hand. "I suggest you take it seriously. Failure to comply will result in fines and potential legal action," the man replied. Marcus clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to lash out. He knew this was exactly what they wanted, to make him lose control and commit a mistake they could exploit. Instead, he took a deep breath and turned to Emily, who had just arrived. "Get David on the phone," he ordered. "I want an emergency injunction filed today and contact security. No one enters or exits without my approval." As the day progressed, the tension escalated. Employees began receiving calls from anonymous numbers offering incentives to leave EcoHarvest and seek other opportunities. Some of the younger staff, already shaken by the inspector's presence, started to waver. By late afternoon, Marcus received another alarming update. One of his engineers, Noah Parker, had discovered that several key pieces of equipment had been tagged with tracking devices, hidden beneath panels and out of sight. "They're watching us," Emily reported, her voice filled with quiet anger. Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "Then it's time we watched them back." That night, Marcus stayed late, reviewing every piece of information his team had gathered. The evidence was mounting, but so was the pressure. He knew the coming days would push him to his limits. But if they thought they could intimidate him, they were sorely mistaken. This was his land, his company, and his fight, and Marcus Blake was a man who never backed down. 3 days had passed since the so-called inspectors invaded his property, disrupting operations, tagging equipment, and unsettling his employees. The once thriving hub of innovation at EcoHarvest Technologies now felt more like a besieged fortress. Every corner of the estate was monitored, every move scrutinized, and every action questioned by the outsiders who acted as though they owned the place. The injunction filed by his lawyer, David Sullivan, had bought some time, temporarily halting the inspectors' most aggressive actions, but it hadn't stopped them entirely. They continued to linger on the outskirts of the facility, conducting what they called observational assessments and documenting every inch of the land. Meanwhile, the cease and desist order still loomed, preventing Marcus from resuming normal operations. It was a calculated move, applying just enough pressure to drain the business without crossing into outright illegality. As he reviewed the latest report from Emily, his operations manager, Marcus's mind buzzed with questions. Who were these people? What did they truly want? And why had they gone to such lengths to target him specifically? The answers remained frustratingly elusive, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about compliance or environmental concerns. This was personal. Emily entered the room without knocking, her tablet in hand and a determined look on her face. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, placing the tablet on his desk. The screen displayed a series of photos taken by the security team the previous night. At first glance, they appeared to be innocuous, grainy images of inspectors moving equipment or setting up devices. But Emily zoomed in on one particular shot and Marcus's eyes narrowed. The photo showed 2 inspectors standing near the main water recycling tanks. One held what seemed to be a standard environmental sensor, while the other was crouched low, adjusting something metallic that blended into the gravel. "What is that?" Marcus asked, leaning closer. "We're not entirely sure," Emily replied, "but one of the guards found a similar device buried near the western perimeter this morning. It's some kind of high-frequency transmitter, likely used for real-time data collection. Marcus's jaw tightened. So they're not just inspecting us, they're spying on us. It gets worse, Emily said, swiping to another image. This one shows a drone hovering over the property, its dark silhouette barely visible against the night sky. We've confirmed at least 2 drones conducting aerial surveys. They're mapping the entire estate. A cold knot formed in Marcus's stomach. This wasn't an inspection. It was reconnaissance. Someone was gathering detailed information about EcoHarvest's layout, infrastructure, and operations. But for what purpose? Before he could ponder further, his phone buzzed with an incoming call from David. Marcus put the phone on speaker and gestured for Emily to stay. "David," he said, "tell me you've got good news." "Depends on how you define good," David replied, his tone clipped. "I've been digging into the ordinances they're using to justify this operation. They were pushed through by a coalition of local officials and a private consulting firm called Terraplan Consultants." "Terraplan Consultants," Emily echoed, frowning. "I've heard that name before." "You should have," David said. "They're a front for the Stonegate Ventures, one of the largest investment firms in the state. Stonegate has been aggressively acquiring agricultural land over the past 2 years, targeting properties with strategic value. Water access, renewable energy systems, you name it." Marcus felt his blood run cold. "The pieces are finally falling into place. So this is about the land," he said. "They're trying to force me out so they can take over." "Exactly," David confirmed. "Stonegate uses Terraplan Consultants to create regulatory pressure on their targets, making it impossible for owners to operate. Once the business is crippled, they swoop in with lowball offers to buy the property. It's efficient, ruthless, and technically legal, at least on paper." "Not this time," Marcus declared, his voice steely. "I'm not selling. I don't care what it takes." "That's the spirit," David replied. "But you need to be smart about this. I've filed a request to review their permits, but it'll take time to go through the courts. In the meantime, document everything. If we can prove they're overstepping their bounds, we'll have a case for damages," David added. After ending the call, Marcus sat in silence for a moment, processing the implications. Stonegate wasn't just a competitor. They were predators, systematically dismantling businesses like his to expand their own empire. And now they had set their sights on EcoHarvest. Determined not to let them win, Marcus convened a meeting with his senior team that afternoon. The mood was tense, but his determination was contagious. "Here's the plan," he began. "First, we're going to secure every critical system on this property. Emily, I want the E-team to conduct a full sweep for any additional transmitters or devices, lock down our servers, and encrypt all sensitive data. Second, we need a complete inventory of our equipment. If anything has been tampered with, I want to know immediately." Emily nodded, already taking notes. "What about the drones?" she asked. "I'll handle that," Marcus responded. "We have a few counter-surveillance tools in storage. It's time to put them to use." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as Marcus's team mobilized to implement his plan. Meanwhile, Marcus focused on the drones. He retrieved a portable signal jammer from the storage shed, a piece of equipment he had acquired years ago but never thought he'd actually need. That evening, as the sun set below the horizon, Marcus stood on the roof of the main building, the signal jammer in hand. Sure enough, the drones returned, their faint hum barely audible over the rustling of the trees. Marcus activated the jammer, watching with grim satisfaction as one of the drones abruptly veered off course and crashed into the nearby woods. It was a small victory, but it gave him a sense of control in an increasingly chaotic situation. The following day brought an unexpected twist. One of Marcus's engineers, a meticulous man named Noah Parker, discovered something alarming during a routine inspection of the western greenhouse. Hidden beneath a panel near the foundation was a small, unmarked container. Inside were several documents, blueprints, maps, and what appeared to be a detailed proposal for a new development project. Marcus spread the documents across his desk, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. The proposal outlined plans for a high-end residential community complete with luxury amenities and private access to a water reservoir that would be built on EcoHarvest's land. The Stonegate Ventures logo was prominently displayed in the corner of each page. "They're already planning the takeover," Emily said, her voice filled with anger. "They're not just planning it," Marcus replied. "They're counting on it. These individuals think they've already won." As he stared at the documents, a spark of determination ignited within him. This was more than a fight for his company. It was a fight for everything he stood for. If Stonegate wanted a war, they were about to get one. The next morning brought an unsettling calm to the property, as if the storm of the past few days had suddenly paused. But Marcus knew better. Stonegate and their proxies weren't done by a long shot. Their methods were calculated and methodical, and Marcus understood this was merely the eye of the storm. Still, the eerie quiet gave him and his team a chance to regroup and prepare for what was coming next. In his office, Marcus pored over the blueprints and development plans discovered in the unmarked container the previous day. The details were chillingly specific. The proposal outlined a timeline for transforming EcoHarvest's property into a sprawling luxury residential enclave, complete with artificial lakes, private gardens, and a community center that would replace his greenhouses. It was a vision of complete erasure. Everything Marcus had built would be wiped away as if it had never existed. "They've already decided we're finished," Marcus muttered to himself. Emily entered the office without knocking, a grim look on her face. "We've got another problem," she said, placing a tablet on the desk. "One of our employees just quit, Jason from the engineering team. He said he couldn't handle the pressure." Marcus's brow furrowed. Jason has been with EcoHarvest for years and is one of our most reliable engineers. Did he mention why? Emily hesitated, then sighed. He mentioned getting an offer from an unnamed consulting firm. It was too good to pass up. Higher salary, relocation expenses, the works. "Sounds like Stonegate got to him," Marcus declared, clenching his fists as a surge of anger rushed through him. "It's not enough for them to attack the company. They're actively picking off our people, sowing doubt and disloyalty among the team. We can't afford to lose anyone else," he said firmly. "Call a meeting with the staff. I need to address this head-on." An hour later, the employees gathered in the main conference room, their expressions a mix of apprehension and exhaustion. Marcus stood at the front, his hands gripping the edges of the table as he looked around the room. "I know this hasn't been easy," he began. "The past few days have been some of the most challenging we've ever faced as a company. But let me make one thing clear. EcoHarvest is not going anywhere. These individuals think they can intimidate us, divide us, and force us out. They believe we'll roll over and let them take everything we've worked for, but they're wrong." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I can't promise this will be over soon, and I can't promise it'll be easy. But I can promise you this. We are going to fight back, and if you're willing to stand with me, we'll come out of this stronger than ever." The room was silent for a moment. Then Emily stepped forward. "I'm with you, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "We all are." The employees nodded in agreement, and Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't giving up. Not yet. However, any sense of relief was short-lived. That evening, a new threat emerged. Marcus was in the control room with Emily, reviewing security footage when an alert flashed across the monitor. One of the motion detectors near the northern perimeter had been triggered. Marcus clicked on the feed, and his stomach tightened at what he saw. Two figures in dark clothing were moving along the fence line, carrying what looked like bolt cutters. They were careful, staying in the shadows and avoiding the security cameras as much as possible. But their intent was clear. They were trying to break in. Marcus grabbed his phone and called the head of security, James Turner. "We've got intruders on the north side," he said. "Take a team and intercept them. I want them caught, not scared off." Within minutes, James and 2 guards were on the move. Marcus and Emily watched the live feed as the security team approached the intruders, using the cover of darkness to their advantage. The figures were focused on cutting through the fence and didn't notice the guards until it was too late. James and his team moved in swiftly, subduing the intruders without a struggle. When the guards brought them back to the main building, Marcus got his first look at them. Two young men, both in their 20s, dressed in black tactical gear. They refused to answer any questions, remaining silent as the guards searched them. Emily pulled a phone from one of their pockets and handed it to Marcus. "Let's see who sent them," she said. Marcus unlocked the phone and scrolled through the recent messages. Most were cryptic, but one stood out, a set of instructions detailing how to disable the property's water recycling system. The message was signed with a single letter. A. Terraplan Consultants, Marcus said, his voice low. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. The intruders were handed over to the local police, but Marcus knew they wouldn't talk. Whoever sent them would ensure they stayed silent. Still, the incident was a clear escalation. Stonegate wasn't just applying pressure anymore. They were moving towards sabotage. The next morning, Marcus called David to update him on the situation. "They're getting desperate," he said. "They sent people onto my property last night to try to disable the water system." David sighed. "That's a bold move, even for them. Did you get any evidence?" "We caught the intruders and found instructions on their phone," Marcus replied. "But I doubt the police will pursue it. They're too entangled with local politics, and Stonegate's influence is too extensive." "Then we'll have to handle this ourselves," David said. "I have a contact at a federal agency who might be willing to look into this. If we can prove Stonegate is engaging in illegal activity, we can shut them down for good." As the call ended, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight was far from over, but he finally had a path forward. That afternoon, as Marcus reviewed the latest reports, Emily entered the office with an envelope in her hand. "This just arrived?" she said, her expression uneasy. Marcus opened the envelope and found a single piece of paper inside. It was a message, typed in bold letters. "Sell your land while you still can." The threat was clear, but instead of fear, Marcus felt a surge of defiance. "I'm not going to let them win," he said quietly. "Let them come," he added. "They're going to regret ever starting this." The air was thick with tension as Marcus stood in the dimly lit control room, staring at the map displayed on the monitor. It showed his property and the surrounding area with every sensor, camera, and checkpoint marked in sharp detail. For days, the assault on his business had escalated. Threats, sabotage, and now a direct attempt to cripple his water recycling system. Marcus knew he was running out of time. Stonegate and their proxies weren't going to stop until they had everything. Emily entered the room, her tablet in hand. "We just got confirmation," she said, her voice tight. "The injunction hearing has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. David says it's our best shot at freezing their operations." Marcus nodded, his jaw set. "And the equipment inventory?" "Completed," Emily replied. "We found 3 more tracking devices embedded in the soil sensors near the east greenhouse. Whoever's behind this knows exactly what they're doing." Marcus leaned on the table, his fingers gripping its edge. "It's not enough to defend ourselves anymore. We need to strike back." That night, Marcus and his security team prepared for what felt like a final stand. They reinforced the perimeter, adjusted the cameras to eliminate blind spots, and conducted a thorough sweep for any remaining devices. But as the preparations continued, an idea began to form in Marcus's mind. "They're mapping us," he said, pacing the control room, "tracking every system, every weak point. But what if we use that against them?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "We feed them false data," Marcus explained. "If they're relying on these transmitters to monitor our operations, we can manipulate what they see, make them think they found a critical failure or, even better, a violation severe enough to backfire on them." Emily's eyes lit up with understanding. "You mean set a trap?" "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "If we can create the appearance of a catastrophic compliance issue, they'll act on it. And when they do, we'll catch them in the act." Over the next several hours, Marcus's team worked tirelessly to implement the plan. Using the transmitter Stonegate had planted, they crafted a data stream that simulated a breach in the property's containment systems. It was a delicate balance, convincing enough to draw attention, but not so obvious that it appeared staged. By midnight, everything was in place. Marcus sat in the control room, watching the monitors as his team monitored the perimeter. The tension was palpable. This plan had to work. Shortly after 2 a.m., the first alert came. A vehicle had stopped near the southern perimeter just outside the range of the security cameras. Moments later, 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their movements swift and practiced. "They're here," Emily said, her voice low but steady. Marcus watched as the intruders made their way toward the east greenhouse, the same area the false data had highlighted as compromised. They carried tools and small devices clearly prepared for sabotage. "Let them get to the target," Marcus instructed. "We need to catch them red-handed." The intruders reached the greenhouse and began working quickly, dismantling parts of the structure and planting what appeared to be small charges. Marcus's stomach churned at the sight. These weren't just saboteurs. They were setting the stage for a disaster that would justify a full shutdown of EcoHarvest's operations. Once they were fully engaged, Marcus gave the signal. Within seconds, the security team moved in, surrounding the intruders with practiced precision. Flashlights illuminated the scene, and the men froze, their hands raised as armed guards closed in. "Don't move," James, the head of security, ordered. The intruders were disarmed and restrained, but it wasn't until their equipment was searched that the full scope of the operation became clear. Among their tools were devices designed to simulate chemical leaks and soil contamination, enough to fabricate evidence of environmental violations severe enough to destroy Marcus's company. "Call the police," Marcus ordered, his voice cold, "and make sure David gets copies of everything we found." By the time the authorities arrived, the evidence was overwhelming. The intruders refused to speak, but their equipment told the story clearly enough. Marcus handed over the data from the tracking devices, the footage from the night's events, and the fake development plans they had left behind during their earlier intrusion. The next morning, Marcus and David arrived at the courthouse, armed with enough evidence to turn the tables on Stonegate. The hearing was tense, with Stonegate's representatives arguing that the compliance measures were necessary for public safety. But when David presented the footage and documentation, their defense began to crumble. "They fabricated violations, planted devices, and sent agents onto my client's property to sabotage his operations," David stated, his voice cutting through the courtroom. "This isn't about compliance or environmental safety. This is about greed." The judge reviewed the evidence with a furrowed brow before turning to Stonegate's attorney. "Do you have an explanation for this?" The attorney stammered, clearly caught off guard. We were following standard procedures. Standard procedures don't include sabotage and planting false evidence," the judge interrupted. "This case warrants further investigation." By the end of the hearing, Marcus had secured not only an injunction against Stonegate's activities, but also an order for an independent investigation into their practices. It was a decisive blow that shifted the momentum firmly in his favor. As he left the courthouse, Marcus felt the weight of the past week begin to lift. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, he had the upper hand. Stonegate had underestimated him, and now they were paying the price. "This isn't just about winning," he said to David as they walked to the car. "It's about ensuring they can't do this to anyone else." David nodded. "And that's exactly what we'll do." The days following the hearing were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus Blake had won a critical battle, but the war was far from over. The injunction against Stonegate meant the immediate pressure on EcoHarvest had eased, and the independent investigation into their practices had sent shockwaves through their carefully constructed facade. Still, Marcus knew Stonegate wouldn't retreat quietly. Corporations like Stonegate didn't admit defeat. They adapted, regrouped, and struck back harder. Back at EcoHarvest, the atmosphere was cautious but hopeful. Employees who had been on edge for weeks now walked the grounds with a renewed sense of purpose. The constant presence of saboteurs and inspectors had lifted, and operations were beginning to return to normal. Yet the scars of the conflict were still visible. Dismantled equipment, reinforced fences, and tightened security measures were stark reminders of the battle they had fought. Marcus gathered his senior team in the conference room for a final debrief. "We've taken the first step," he began, his tone resolute. "The injunction gives us room to breathe, and the investigation into Stonegate will expose their methods. But make no mistake, this isn't over. We need to stay vigilant." Emily, seated to his right, nodded. "We've implemented a comprehensive security protocol. Every system is being monitored in real time, and all employees are undergoing additional training on how to handle potential threats." "Good," Marcus said. "But we can't just play defense. If we want to protect EcoHarvest long-term, we need to take the fight to them." The team discussed plans to expand EcoHarvest's influence and partnerships. By aligning with other independent agricultural companies and environmental organizations, they could create a network strong enough to resist corporate predators like Stonegate. It wasn't just about protecting EcoHarvest anymore. It was about setting an example and helping others stand up to similar threats. 2 weeks later, the investigation into Stonegate yielded its first major breakthrough. Federal agents raided TerraPlan Consultants' offices, uncovering a trove of documents that detailed their coordinated efforts to destabilize targeted businesses. The plans for EcoHarvest's takeover were just the tip of the iceberg. Dozens of other companies had been similarly attacked, their land and resources siphoned off under the guise of regulatory enforcement. The news spread quickly, tarnishing Stonegate's reputation and triggering lawsuits from affected business owners. For Marcus, it was a moment of vindication. Watching the public backlash unfold, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Stonegate had finally been exposed for what they were: predators who hid behind bureaucracy and influence. But the victory wasn't just about taking down Stonegate. It was about what came next. 1 month after the hearing, EcoHarvest hosted an open house event, inviting local officials, business leaders, and community members to tour the facility. Marcus stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and explaining EcoHarvest's mission. The event was a success, showcasing not only the company's innovations, but also its resilience. As the day wound down, Emily approached Marcus with a small plaque in her hands. She handed it to him with a smile. "I thought this would be a good addition to the property," she said. Marcus turned the plaque over, reading the engraved words. "Here stands a company that refused to yield." He smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It's perfect," he said, motioning for her to help him mount it near the main greenhouse. As he stood there, watching the late afternoon sun cast its golden glow over the estate, Marcus reflected on how far they'd come. EcoHarvest wasn't just a business. It was a testament to the power of standing firm against impossible odds. The battle with Stonegate had cost him dearly: time, resources, and peace of mind. But it had also strengthened his resolve and revealed the depths of his team's loyalty and determination. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to relax. The battle was over, but the lessons it had taught him would endure. EcoHarvest was stronger than ever, and so was he. As the last of the guests departed, Marcus walked the estate alone, taking in the sights and sounds of his land. The hum of the irrigation systems, the glow of the greenhouses, the distant chatter of his employees. It was a symphony of resilience and hope. Though he knew challenges would arise again, he was ready for them. After all, this was his land, his legacy, and his fight, and Marcus Blake was a man who never backed down.